Welcome back to another episode of Talk Track. It's the Telegraph podcast where we talk about and respond to the news of the day that we think will be of interest to the railroading community. And as always, by that, we mean really everyone, the people who ship things on the railroads, the people who operate the railroads, the people who service the railroads. As always, I'm here with Telegraph co-founder and CEO Harris Ligon. Harris, excited to get into it.
Yeah, it's going to be another fun episode. I think we've got a couple of things stacked up for this one. Um, Really, I think it's hard for us to do one of these without talking about the merger. We seem to try every week, but we're always gifted with more opportunity. And so, David, when I read the latest announcement from the STB, I got the sense that it seems like things are moving forward. Maybe we kind of have a timeline. We can see some point in the horizon that we're running towards. What was your read on the latest from the STB?
Well, I'm excited to get your take because I think you and I have different perspectives on it. I'm still a little bit sort of cold water, I guess, on the news of this. It's a calendar. I mean, I was excited to see when the public hearings will happen, like when the congressional hearings,
Sure.
and that's spring of next year. So that's like something to look forward to. There's some dates in there for people who want to be on record as responding to this. So, for anyone listening who didn't know that, but those dates are there. People can file their thoughts.
And
But
I think
ultimately,
that one is coming up quickly. It's in September.
that's right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So people who want to file, and it's a virtue of our system that they can. I think that's a great deadline to know. Really, the more interesting thing to me, if I were trying to read the tea leaves on where this goes, is not so much that there is a calendar. That's important. But, we're still, I think, the major development was the Supreme Court slaughter decision, which really changes what independent boards can do in
Right.
relation to the wishes of the administration. And, we saw recently that the FCC has been dealing with that and some of the actions they've taken,
Mhm.
and members of the board of the FCC having some misgivings about that. To my mind, that all bears more heavily on the outcome of this merger. Do independent boards make independent decisions in 2026 and 2027 or not? The timeline is just sort of sets the stage for that to play out, I
Right.
think.
Right. And typically with these things, the longer time horizon you have, the more influence maybe that decision could have, or there could be other things that might affect the trajectory, which my read on it was it feels like the STB kind of shut down some of the quick, snappy decisions that the applicants were hoping for, because I think we all know like time kills all deals, and unfortunately this one has a fairly long time cycle to actually bake in the oven a little bit.
That is a really good point. I'm sure UPNNS were not happy to see this thing, with that kind of timeline. But on the other side, I mean, I think our friends at Railroad Weekly said it well that the basically the plea from the opponents of the merger was kill it now. They
Yes.
appealed to the STB to say don't even start this calendar, stop this now because it doesn't stand. Obviously, they weren't successful, so I think it cuts the other way too. That we have a timeline for a full case certainly disappoints the opponents of the merger.
Yeah, I appreciate that we have something of a time horizon now, because I mean, when it was held in abeyance, it was just like pressing pause on the video game, and maybe we'll come back to it
Yeah.
at some point, right? Okay, I think that's enough merger talk for us now, because guess what? It seems like we're going to get at least another year of it. So more
Exactly.
to come there. Um, we don't normally talk about it on this podcast, or really ever. Telegraph made the news quite a bit this week. We was really surprised to see a lot of the things coming up, and I say surprised, right? I obviously knew what was going on in the background, but I can at least act surprised here. The first thing that came out was a long-standing kind of partnership in the background, but our first public announcement with RailPulse. Dave, you've written a couple of blogs on telematics.
Yeah.
What was your kind of your big takeaway from finally seeing the names of RailPulse and Telegraph and the lights together?
Gosh, I mean, I was excited to see it because obviously, like you said, you and I kind of know how those things work, but we're inside baseball, if you will, and most people aren't that inside of it. So putting it out in the world that this partnership exists and there's collaboration and communication, I thought was exciting. How about you? I mean, going from the inception of the company to that's got to feel like kind of an exciting milestone.
You know, the fun thing about it was Rail Pulse and Telegraph actually kind of started around the same time. So we've
All
been
right.
on a journey somewhat together, and at various points have kind of crossed over, which has been great. Our view has always been net positive on telematics in the industry. If Rail Pulse is the standard, or is the consortium, or is the majority of kind of how folks are ingesting that data, we want to bring that in and accelerate the adoption. And fundamentally, the value that folks are getting out of telematics, which you and I have editorialized plenty over the years, I just want more people to have access to that. And so if we can help to that mission, awesome. Yes, we are happy to raise our hands for that. The second thing is if we can help alleviate some of the concern or questions or maybe hesitancy that folks may have either about equipping their own rail assets, supporting the equipping of rail assets, or making use of the data in a single unified kind of workflow, happy to kind of accelerate that. So yeah, candidly, we should have done it sooner. The other interesting thing was you were published in Railway Age with a very good ode to a local hockey player in the Washington area. Tell us more about this hack trick thesis that you had.
Gosh, yeah, yeah. Anyone who watches this may already subscribe to Railroad Age. I think it's a daily read for me. There's a lot in there, so I was really honored that they included my thoughts, recent thoughts on this. And so yeah, the idea is that well, to go back to the origin of the notion, as part of our upcoming market consist report that we're going to talk about, one of the inputs to that was just listening to all the earnings calls for Q2.
Right.
And with the mission of distilling that for the readers of the consist and to listeners of this podcast. And one of the things that struck me as I listened to that was Q2 was a great quarter. People probably already know that, and they can read our take on it in the consist. But what made it great? And of course, if you on an earnings call, what a railroad is going to say is, well, it's our people and it's our decisions that led up to this point. Which, not even to say that's wrong, but I thought that story was incomplete. And it was incomplete in the sense that there were three major policy actions that really contributed to a super strong Q2 in 2026.
Right.
Strong, I mean, in terms of railroad volumes. And then if people who don't watch hockey might not know that hat trick is the term for 3 goals. So it was a convenient name to give a 3-part argument. And Railroad Age ran with it.
It's great to see your hockey knowledge coming to the forefront of this discussion. So a hat trick obviously implies threes. I know you're a big Boston guy, so gone are the days of the Bruins having the Zdeno Chara and Brad Marchand, right? Only they were still together. You obviously reference Ovi, and that was a cool ode to him. But you were really thinking through some of those policy items as basically precursors, right? And so those policy actions did not take place yesterday or even a few months ago, right? Those things had to be in place prior to that to then generate the outcome, which you've now summarized for our readers. Tell us a little bit more about those pieces, and obviously these are things that are now in the market consist. We'd love to kind of run through those 3 points.
Yeah, gosh, I'll do them. There's 3 of them, and I'll maybe do them in order of increasing complexity, I guess, or maybe increasing surprise to me. So the first one, I don't think we're breaking any ground here because the trade press has been covering this, and people who in this world probably know. There was a pretty big crackdown on truck drivers by this administration in the last 12 months or more. And by crackdown, that really means a lot of drivers were taken off the road and a lot of truck driving schools were closed. We had the exact numbers in the report. And, there's a lot to talk about there, but to our purposes, the end result of that is there's less trucking capacity, which really caused on many lanes rates to skyrocket. I mean, working with analysts from the trucking side, it was hockey stick on some of the charts that I saw going back to hockey. And what that does is it opens up opportunity for modal conversion. So particularly on the domestic intermodal side, what we heard from a lot of the Class 1 railroads was, hey, we had great growth. And they themselves were saying, and a lot of this is just because it got comparatively much more expensive to move things by truck. So
Yeah.
that was a policy result. That was um, the administration not intending that result. I mean, I think the intention of many of the efforts in the truck driving space was to improve motorist safety, was to try to get unsafe or underqualified drivers off the road. In so doing, a lot of capacity came out of the system,
Right.
prices went up, freight moved to the rails where it could. So that was one policy effect that, and I think people are pretty familiar with that. Another one, and this has really been, I think, a learning opportunity for a lot of folks, is that there was a lot of gnashing of teeth around the tariffs, going back to the Liberation Day
True.
tariffs in
True.
April of last year. And I don't intend to speak for the enduring result of all of that across every sector, but I can tell you in terms of the sectors we watch as things moving on rail, it looks to me like metals, steel, copper, things that were especially protected, moved more quarter on quarter, year on year comparison. So another part of the hat trick, the second piece is
Mm-hmm.
some of that activity seems to, at least in the near term, have resulted in, and it could last, some growth. And
Right.
there's nuance to
Right.
that we can get into. And then the third one, and this was really a learning opportunity for me, was the connection between the war in Iran and rail volumes wasn't obvious to me going into it, but I really think it played out in a very fascinating way because we are a great energy exporter now, but we haven't been always.
True.
When I
Yeah.
started my
Right.
career, we were very energy dependent. Now we're a great energy exporter, and particularly on the natural gas side, we're relatively insulated from the rest of the world, um, you know, compared to like our European trading partners, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or I should say our European competitors. And that's a long way of getting at the export opportunities, particularly for American petrochemical providers, for chemical makers, opened up by the fact that our natural gas feedstock was so much comparatively cheaper compared to global competitors, put a lot of volumes on the rail. At least that's the thesis that I'm putting out. So those are the three things that, outside of all their other implications, the crackdown on truck drivers, the tariffs, and the run up in energy prices owing to the war in Iran, contributed a lot to Q2 volume growth on the rails.
And that that it's funny because it's interesting. You had been working on the market consist for some time, and so you had obviously been watching that section of it. But I mean, a good core portion of the consist has been forecasting volumes, being
Yeah.
very public about our accuracy, right? And so these two things are a little bit intertwined. But I think this gave you an opportunity to shine the light on some of the leading kind of indicators or drivers that would have shifted what we ultimately saw in the market consist. I know, but kind of before we get into some of your takeaways on the earnings calls, which was a really fun and I think unique addition to this version. Um, yeah, I mean, volumes did great, and I think everybody like banged that drum like very very loudly across a couple of different sectors. It seemed like for me reading through the consist a couple of times, the guy who went to corn school is extremely bullish on ag. And tell us a little bit more about what you think is kind of like driving up and supporting that.
Gosh, yeah, and I appreciate the shout out to my brethren at Corn School, where I once toiled proudly. uh, yeah, so and that kind of goes back to, I still believe that there's a strong headwind to corn volumes, and we've had some fun sharing that idea, which is that with these high energy prices, nitrogen is more expensive. When nitrogen isn't expensive, if I'm a farmer, I don't grow corn, I grow soybeans.
Right.
Soybeans are a smaller product per acre than corn, depressing volumes. So, we made that call, and it turned out to be verified by the planting intentions that the USDA shared. But even when I put that into our forecasting model, grain volume still looked really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was one headwind that like we included, but it didn't bring down the model predictions. A second sort of manual depression, if you will, that we put on the forecast was, most of our grain exports, particularly those corn soybean exports we're talking about, go to China. The trade relationship with China is very fraught right now. People who were watching towards the end of last year really saw how ugly it can get before it gets better. So, we ratcheted that down a little bit, but it still looks strong. The crop Right now, we don't know the new crop year results, but I
It
think
hasn't
there's
come out of the
reason
ground yet.
hasn't come out of the ground yet, but there's reason to believe it's going to be strong. I still think it will be weaker than it would have been without this crop choice switch. But anyway, that was a long way of getting at. We're calling for strong grain volumes, even with those headwinds,
Right.
into this fall in this crop year.
As somebody that has been the recipient of a ton of Midwest corn sweat, I can tell you it does feel, at least anecdotally, in the environment that it's going to be a strong year. And of course, China is back to buying,
Yeah,
so we're in a good spot there. It seems like you're also pretty bullish on chemicals and petroleum and coal as well, and it seemed like to tell us more about that.
gosh, and the chemicals and the petroleum is really that fuel price story that we discussed with the
Right.
hat trick. I mean, I and we're always happy to follow up with anyone who wants to talk about the technical side of the modeling. Exactly how it's built. But suffice it to say, to put it briefly, there's the quantitative output, and then there's the fiddling with the dials we do to try to capture reality. Uh, and they were strong, and they came out stronger after we fiddled the dials to recognize this export opportunity, and
Right.
that was particularly on chemicals and petroleum products.
Right.
Coal is interesting in that I feel like we've always been contrarian there, in that we're not saying that the coal decline is over. We're not saying
Yeah.
anything that dramatic. But even in the earnings calls, we saw Class 1 carriers with year-on-year coal growth. Not all of them, but I think it was for sure one, if not two. We saw retirements, coal power plant retirements phased out longer or delayed
Correct. Correct.
owing to these energy prices. So, in one of the quarters, we're talking about a modest increase, and that's increase year on year, not increase
Oh yeah,
versus
over the
2 years ago
past
or 3 years
15
ago,
year
but
decline.
like signs of life that I believe will happen, and it was kind of, I don't know, interesting or dare I say exciting to see, given the history of that sector is, or the commentary on that sector is almost always so negative.
Yeah.
There was something inspiring to see a little bit of light there.
So I'm always known for giving you a curveball on these. How much of this drum banging and celebratory nature of the earnings calls is owed back to the data center build out? Obviously, you discussed that in the market consist, but how much of that is really being driven by that pronounced effect on the economy?
Gosh, that's a great question. If I had everything I wanted, I would know the exact number, but I
Great,
don't.
yes.
But I say that in the sense that what's a number good for? A number is really just a measure of proportion. Is something big or small? And no matter what, the data center build out is big. I think we
Yes.
have the figure in there. $7 trillion globally expected to be spent by 2030. I mean, it's big. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of volume. I guess the
A
mystery
lot of
number
energy.
that it's a lot of energy. The mystery that we don't have is how much of that building activity will use rail transport. You know, People have maybe seen there's been some interesting articles about how much of it is moving in the air, the influence in certain parts of the trucking market. I think it stands to reason that rail will get a piece of it, but the number I don't have at the top of my head is how big that piece is. The
Yeah. My view is that if you're working at a railroad, large or small today, especially if you're in the short line space, the ability to lay a stub track and work with your economic development partners to figure out where things are going. I know that this is a big shell game. Oftentimes, like the what's discussed in a public hearing is definitely not what actually shows up, and there are multiple kind of shell corporations in this overall process. By the time like things are being built, people are rarely informed. I think that there is a really great opportunity, and I think we have seen definitely an uptick. And I know, like in the grander volumes, yes, like aggregates are doing really well. We've definitely seen that with some of
yeah,
our customers, and so it stands to reason that if you work in economic development or you're managing a market, it is high time for you to be working the phones or going to events to seeing if you can just position your franchise, your network, your 30 miles of track to be kind of the in delivery method for that, because it is relatively easy to lay a stub track, relatively easy to set up kind of like a transload operation, and that's kind of the fun thing about transloading is you can stand that up in a lot of places, and I think there is an opportunity for rail to shine here. Obviously, creates some pressure for folks to get out of their houses and go talk to some folks, but I think there's a really interesting opportunity there.
That's a great call out too, because I think when we think about the data center build out, it's easy to miss a really critical piece, which is it's not just the big warehouses full of servers, it's also the power network that feeds those facilities.
Generators.
All that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The stuff that's going to move on the rail. And just thinking back that I haven't seen much reference of it recently, but at least the conversation at the federal level about the build out of these data centers was that they were going to be responsible for building their own power supplies. How that plays out is probably going to be decided at a more local level, but I do think a lot of capacity is going to come online. A lot of stuff is going to get built just to power those facilities, which is another component of rail volumes too, and brings up one thing that has happened, even since our last draft of the consist. But as we were thinking about it, I don't want to worry any of the production team. This really just means I think we have the right words in there. We don't need to take them out. Was that we called out some of the risks to forecast towards the end.
Right, we always do.
And one of the risks to forecast at that time was, New York State declared a moratorium on data center construction. Readers might want to look out for more of those to see
True.
if this thing's going to be slowed. And since we put together basically the final version, Texas of all states has taken similar actions, not the same kind of moratorium, but a change in position.
Right.
And I really think that candidates' positions on data centers and energy prices are going to come up this November, and that could turn into either a very strong tailwind or a very strong headwind for this construction.
Yeah, depending on the region, right? I mean, if we say, for example, if North Dakota is pro and South Dakota is against, or vice versa, that will change the landscape of where the build out happens, and obviously rail traffic. And again, if you're in one of those areas and you have decision rights over economic development or influence, it's probably a great time to actually begin some of those conversations. Well, David, I'm super excited for this version of the market consist. Like it came together really well. We've got a lot of interesting, I think, traditional points in view in there, but you really went the extra mile to add in some additional context and color. And I think the readers are definitely going to benefit for it. So thank you for shipping out another episode. And folks, we have enjoyed having you for another edition of Talk Track, where David and I share a little bit of the news of the day. Sometimes Telegraph makes it in, and we're excited for you to read the market consist coming up. Thanks for watching. And if you have the opportunity, follow us on LinkedIn or visit us at telegraph.io. Thanks.